One other thing I thought that would be a good getting to know you type thing, so anyone out there who's maybe not 100% familiar with my channel or isn't familiar with you at all, is we could just, very basic, just every movie nerd has a couple favorite movies of all time. So, Devon, what are your favorite movies?
Oh, man. So, I'm sure I went off on a tangent about this for you before, but to me, the question is kind of a dichotomy of between movies that you think are technically good and movies that you really, like, enjoy on a personal level. And I don't know, I sort of have these theories that everybody has these movies, like, because we live in a movie culture society now. We were born into it. So everybody's got these movies that they've seen from childhood where they almost have, let's say, an unfair bias towards them just because they saw them when they were little. Like, for example, this is by no means an answer to your question, but you remember the film Godzilla, which came out in like '98,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
the American one with by Roland Emmerich with Matthew Broderick in it. That was a movie that I loved as a kid, and I would always say something like that. And it was basically off of Jurassic Park hype. I would love Jurassic Park when I was a kid, and then I saw the trailer for this movie, and I'm like, Mom, there's dinosaurs in this one too. The one dinosaur's as big as a city. It's crazy. So we see something like that, and then like years later, you go back and watch it, and it's like atrocious, and you're like, wow, the effects are terrible, and Matthew Broderick is nice. Ferris Bueller, what are you doing in this?
Exactly.
So that's really like there's like an interesting dichotomy there, which I think as somebody who like comes up with ideas for movies, that's an interesting thing to look for. So something that would be like a technically good movie for me, like I feel like people like to be right. And if you're gonna ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, I'm gonna tell you what I think the best movie of all time is, and that would be 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay.
Just the scope of that movie, the transitions, the symbolism, I guess, of the man working with tools, and then in the next shot, the tools have helped him got to space. And then the whole tale of, and now the tools are working against you. You're talking about the robots being the tools. You got HAL 9000 working against you, and it's just a very existential film to me. Like, to me, that's the kind of movie you could show to an alien who doesn't even know anything about humans really, and they could almost get the picture.
Exactly. Or they would say, "Hey, that's all wrong. We don't do things like that."
Yeah. Well, yeah, they could. Yeah, exactly. But that just on a cosmic sort of scale, that is what I would consider the greatest movie of all time, almost. Just
okay.
And then I already mentioned Jurassic Park being one of my favorites when a kid. In terms of entertainment value, I think that movie really delivers on what people want out of an action adventure sort of movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Spielberg always delivers on that sort of thing. Like, I just watched Indiana Jones movies recently too, and it's almost like serial entertainment. Like, there was a part in Indiana Jones, the first one, where they literally like. It's right before the big car chase with Indy and the Nazis and the Ark, and like he just goes over to, I'm blanking on his name, John Rhys Davies. He goes over to John Rhys Davies and he's like, "They went that way," and like they have a 2-second conversation, and then boom, another action scene. Like, it's just entertainment after entertainment after entertainment. And people say about Jurassic Park, they say the characters weren't that great, but everybody remembers Dr. Malcolm.
Exactly.
And the humans weren't even really the star of the movie. That's the other thing that I like about it on a cosmic sort of scale, is that dinosaurs aren't dragons. They're not made up. Dinosaurs really existed, and then like to bring something that really existed all the way back in and then tell a story with it is really interesting to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, that was one of the first movies too. I remember because from a young age I was always like, I want to watch a movie. Like, I think my grandma had this book of like kids say the darndest things. So like whenever we would say something funny, like me and my siblings. She would like write it down, and like a recurring thing in that book was me saying, "Hey, let's go watch a movie." So I have that going for me. But the first one that I remember being like, "Oh man, movies are awesome," is Jurassic Park. When my dad showed that to me at a young age, that was the first time where I ever like tried to figure out like how they worked. Like watching that like hour and a half long documentary with James Earl Jones, where he's like, "Here's how they built all the robots, and here's how the burgeoning." CGI industry helped create this and make them more realistic. Like, yeah, it's a very, very innovative movie, it still kind of holds up to this day. When you look back
absolutely.
on it.
So, you said that you had a quote. It said something like, what was it? Let's go
watch a movie.
Let's go watch a
Yeah.
movie. If you look in my senior high school book, this is true. My senior high school yearbook, my senior quote is, "Hey guys, let's go make a movie." So if I don't make it in the industry, it's really going to come back to bite me in the ass at the 20-year reunion. But anyway, the other thing you said was that it helped launch. Jurassic Park helped launch the visual effects sort of thing. But
Right.
that and Terminator 2 in the year before really sort of helped launch the CGI trend that Hollywood has really been sort of spiraling ever since.
Yeah.
Spiraling in ever since. And what I think is ironic about that is and Stan Winston went out of his way to prove this, most of the dinosaurs in the movie, screen-wise, are animatronic.
Right.
So it's very funny that it was actually a very skillful use of animatronics and those animatronics and CGI.
Yeah.
But what people took away from that was like, wow, CGI can do anything, and they went
Exactly.
crazy with it, and they forgot about the uncanny valley, where to properly sell an illusion, you got to use a combination of these tactics. You
Right.
got to use practical puppets, people in costumes, and CGI
Yeah.
to fully fool the eye, fool the mind. So I just think that was something that was really mastered in that movie that I haven't really seen since. I actually wrote an essay about comparing Jurassic Park to The Wizard of Oz in terms of technology, where The Wizard of Oz you had color technology now, which was you started out in black and white, and most of the movies in previous to that were black. A very large majority were black and white, and then you had The Wizard of Oz, which showcases the new technology, but it showcases it in a way that fits to the story well.
Yeah.
So it's not in color until she gets to Oz, right?
Exactly.
Just like.
And you have a movie in the 30s that, like, you have a shot where she opens up a door and you go from sepia tone to black and white to color in the same shot, which is crazy.
Exactly. So it was a great way to showcase that new technology, and then of course the movie was a monumental hit because of it. We're still talking about it to this day. So I think that's a good way that those two movies are similar, because Jurassic Park did the same sort of way to show off that kind of technology.
Right. Yeah.
And things blew up after that. Of course, color movies were trends after that, and then after Jurassic Park, everybody wanted to use CGI, no matter how bad it looked sometimes, like in Godzilla at certain times. But
I think the main problem with it is that, like, it's like you said, they were like, wow, CGI is awesome, and they should have looked at it as these effects are awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that the fact that we've been so CGI-centric has sort of taken the focus away from sort of perfecting like puppetry and animatronics and all that, which is still just as valid. Like you were mentioning before we started recording, Annihilation. I don't know if you know this, but that scene with the bear is 50% CGI, 50% animatronic
really?
and puppetry. Yeah.
So somewhere exists, like, because I really liked the design of that creature. It was like, but it was like, he was like skull over its face or whatever. So there's an animatronic that exists to that somewhere.
Yeah, it was mostly just the head, and then like so whenever there'd be a shot of like it, like the head and the shoulders in the shot.
Yeah, I seen. Yeah,
it was
they're
like
tied to
it
a
was
chair
someone. Yeah, it was someone with like their hand sticking through, like working the mouth, and then whenever they would go wide, it would be CGI. But like
very cool. I didn't know that.
And that was one of the things where it's like it takes a lot for a movie to like really get under my skin these days. Like if it's trying to do something disturbing with an effect, and that scene, like I was like, man, why is that so unnerving to me? Because it's like with CGI, most of the time you can say, okay, well that's not really there. That's they just put that in the computer afterward. But there's something tangible about having. Not only does it enhance the performance of the actors to have something to bounce off of on the set,
instead of like having to look at a tennis ball or something on a stick or something.
Right, but it like when there's something, it's like you said with the uncanny valley. There's something in your head that just connects where you're like, that's a real thing and that's fake. And knowing that it's actually there, I think, especially when you're in a movie like Annihilation or you're doing like a scary effect, knowing that it's something that's physically there is almost more unnerving than anything that they could try and program in. So
I agree. I think that a lot of it, like you said, it enhances the actor's performance, but I think also when you're doing it in CGI, there are so many things that you have to calculate out right, and for most of them there are computer programs, but they don't always get it right, like about lighting and about shadow and about how it interacts with its environment. When you have a physical thing on set that the light is hitting
it's
it,
already done for you.
Yeah, it's all done for you, and the actors can. It has to make it easier for the actors to be able to act that. Like, there's a real steaming, horrible creature mouth next to you instead of just having to pretend. Like,
exactly, yeah.
It's almost like when you hear the stories about how Ian, I'm blanking on his last name, Ian McKellen, on the set of The Hobbit, having to act surrounded completely by green screen and no other actors.
Right, yeah.
They're like, does it make you a stronger actor to be able to act in those circumstances, to be able to have that have the character and the motivation still in mind, even though the world around you is the complete opposite of the world that the character is around in the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Does that make you a stronger actor, or does it break your will? Like the rumor said, Ian started crying on set.
Yeah, he did, because you look back at those first Lord of the Rings movies and everything's forced perspective.
Yeah.
So like again, that's something tangible that you could interact with, and
it's in the
it
room.
gives you a greater appreciation for what you're working for, because you're like, wow, this is something innovative and groundbreaking, and no one else is doing this, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this. Whereas if you're just in a big green empty room, you're like, okay, I guess short Elijah Wood is right next to me, and his head would be right about there, I guess. And that's not to say I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, all CGI is bad and practical effects. I'm not like a purist.
Yeah, this isn't a make movies great again rally.
Exactly. Yeah, everything has its place, and I think it's recognizing when it's appropriate to use what technique, rather than treating one technique as sort of like a fix-all. Like you wouldn't when you wouldn't put one single lens on for your production and say this is what we're shooting the whole thing with. There's variety. There's different things that go together to create something good. There's not like a one set way to make everything good and correct. I think.
Definitely agree. You need a mixed bag sometimes.
Yeah.
Just to be able to sell the illusion.
So all that is to say that 2001: A Space Odyssey is your favorite movie.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, how much CGI was in that? They didn't even have it really back in the '60s.
It inspired Star Wars.
They were doing upside down shots and anti-gravity shots and stuff like that. I think there's a tendency to say let's fix it in post with the computers. That even in our time together in college, they were trying to get us to refrain from that sort of behavior. Yeah. Like if you're on set and you have a chance to get another shot, and it might look better, and then you wouldn't have to fix it in post, then you got to do that, Right. But I think now there was a movie, I can't remember the name of it. There was a guy, it was done by these guys that worked on The Thing, and which movie with great practical effects.
Which one, the 2011 or the
old
82?
One. The old one. Okay. So, and then they tried to do another movie. In the last 10 years.
Yep.
You might be familiar with it. What's it called?
I can go on and on. It was also called The Thing. What happened was the 82 version was a remake of a movie that came out in the 50s. All of it started with a short film called Who Goes There, which was sort of about, like, the gist of it was the 82 movie, where it's like an alien that can shapeshift and you got to figure out who's human and who's not. The 50s movie was inspired by that, but they kind of took a lot of liberties and changed things around to where it was just like a Frankenstein monster, basically, instead of like an imitator. So John Carpenter took it back to, this is like Jurassic Park for me, I could go on and on about the thing, but he took it back to the roots of that short story and made it about like an alien that could shapeshift and had all those revolutionary practical effects. And then in 2011, I think it was Universal owned the rights to The Thing, and they wanted to do a sequel. Originally, this is a fun tangent, but originally they were going to get, what's his name?
It's Alex something, isn't it? Or
no, it was the guy who did the first season of The Walking Dead, Shawshank Redemption, Frank Darabont.
Very great director.
He was going to do a mini-series on Sci-Fi about in the 80s, a rescue team shows up and recovers, spoiler alert, recovers the two bodies of the characters at the end of the 1982 thing, and brings them back to like an Area 51-esque place in the desert in the States. And then one of them thaws out and becomes the Thing and infects like a small town.
Okay.
And then the whole movie becomes about the government trying to quarantine this town and prevent the thing from spreading. So he was going to do that as a miniseries, and then they shelved that in favor of what I think you're talking about, which was the 2011 prequel that was set a few days before the events of the 82 movie. Because what happens in the 82 movie is the Thing is unleashed at like a Norwegian base, and then it turns into a dog and escapes to the American base where the John Carpenter movie takes place. So the 2011 Thing was all about what happened at that Norwegian base, first of all.
That was the remake.
That was the sort of like soft remake, mostly. It was like a prequel remake, but also like the same exact story beats of like, we don't know what this alien does, and then there's like the doubt, and then they come up with a test to figure out who's human, and then everything goes to hell and all that. But the controversy was they wanted to stay as faithful as possible to the original one and not use CGI unless they absolutely had to. So they came up with a bunch of brilliant practical effects to like pay homage to the first one, And then the studio saw the rough cut and was like, we would rather you just paint over all of this with CGI. So there's not a single practical effect in that movie unless they're looking at a carcass of the thing.
So this was for the remake then, or
the prequel that came out in 2011. It was, they did a whole bunch of practical effects, and then Universal said, this doesn't look good. We want all of this to be replaced with CGI.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone got mad at the filmmakers being like, oh, why did they use CGI? But it's like, they didn't choose that.
They tried. They didn't
were
have
forced
a choice.
to do that. Yeah. So
I think that remake that you're talking about, the one that ended up using almost exclusively CGI, was so poorly received by some of the people. And you said you know a lot about the thing, so this might be an interesting little tidbit of information for you. Is that one of the guys who was a practical effects artist on the first of the thing, his name was Alec Gillis. I thought it was Guinness. I couldn't remember, but I was like, no, Alec Guinness was definitely a guy from Star Wars.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Of course I know him. He's me. No, but so this guy's name is Alec Gillis. He worked on the older thing, and then they saw the new thing. He might have been consulted on the new thing, but I remember it being such a bad reaction that he actually made a Kickstarter to go make his own The Thing movie.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that came to fruition in 2015. I couldn't remember what the movie was called. It's called Harbinger Down.
I haven't seen it.
Have you never seen it?
No.
So this one, they did come through with the practical effects, but it is kind of a cautionary tale. Because now Harbinger Down, it has like Lance Henriksen in it. Like, it's actually a decent movie.
Okay.
And it's about an ice fishing vessel in the Arctic who ends up coming across the thing-like alien, which is capable of shape-shifting, and there's like reptilian tentacles, and I don't want to spoil it too bad for you. But because I do think it's worth a watch.
Okay.
But it's a cautionary tale in such a way that when you put a practical effects guy behind the camera as a director, he's sort of, I don't know if he doesn't know how to shoot it, but a lot of it you can kind of tell it was like the way that the tentacles are moving. I don't know if you could see the wires, or you could just like your mind puts the wires there, even though they might have went through the effort to hide the wires. Yeah. It still kind of looks like something that the wires are jerking around. Like, it requires something more than just practical effects. So that just goes to show you that there's no film purists here that are talking about, oh, we need just practical effects. We're going to get rid of CGI completely.
Right.
It needs to be a healthy mix of, and it depends on, the particular shot and what the story is. And
exactly.
But yeah, I don't know. Harbinger Down is worth a shot. Came out in 2015. It's definitely worth a viewing if you are interested in.
And it's a short film?
No, it's a full-length film actually. That I guess they got it. I can't remember if they got it completely crowdfunded or if they got it kickstarted and then the studio was interested later down the line.
Okay.
Or I don't remember exactly how that went, but I definitely think it's worth a view if you are interested in films that have practical effects and do movie monster type things. It's definitely worth a shot. Definitely worth a view.
I'll definitely check that out. I think I remember hearing something about that, but I might have forgotten about it.
If only because for you that if you're such a huge fan of The Thing,
definitely
that it's kind of technically part of that legacy.
Right. Which, to tie it back into our previous point, The Thing is in my top 5.
Yeah. So what are your favorite movies?
Yeah. No. So The Thing is, I usually put it at number 3, and then we'll get into my number 2. Another date because I might want to recommend it. But my favorite movie of all time is, I kind of, with what you were saying about the dichotomy of like what's good and what do I like, I sort of combine that when I'm watching. I don't really separate it out where it's like, this is a technically well-made movie and I really like it, and then this is a movie that's maybe not so technically well-made but I really like it. I just sort of lump them into the same category.
Okay.
My favorite movie of all time is
Drum roll, please.
A movie where I think where there's a lot to appreciate about it technically, if not purely from a writing standpoint, but also from a performance and a shooting standpoint. It's called, it came out in 2008, it's called Synecdoche, New York. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I've never heard of it.
That's
the title of the film?
Synecdoche, New York, yeah. It's made by Charlie Kaufman, who was the writer of Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine. Yeah.
That ended up being one of my favorite movies, just basing on how it's written.
Yeah,
brilliant, almost stream of conscious, almost.
Exactly. So he wrote and directed this movie. It was his first time directing anything. Philip Seymour Hoffman's in it. A whole bunch of great supporting actors. It's Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Catherine Keener. Michelle Williams.
Wow.
I forgot that one guy. If you heard his voice, you'd recognize him. I forget what his name is.
Can you think of anything else that he's in?
he does a lot of like bit parts. The only other movie I can think of off the top of my head is another Charlie Kaufman movie called Anomalisa. But so he's a bit part in it. But yeah, the Synecdoche, New York is the gist of it is Philip Seymour Hoffman is a 40-something playwright and playwright and director who is severely depressed, and his life is kind of in shambles. He's in a marriage where his wife is kind of disconnected from him, and the only joy he kind of gets is like in his plays and his daughter. And the whole movie is sort of his life from ages like 40 up until like 80-ish. And the whole movie is his life just falling apart. Basically, it's things start off bad for him, and they just keep getting worse and worse and worse as it goes. That sounds terrible, but like the way that it's done is like it's sort of like the whole movie is a metaphor. It sounds so pretentious to say, but like if you watch it, you'll get what I mean. But it's the whole thing is sort of like a metaphor for like life itself. Like as you're watching this movie, you're like there's sort of like these subtle bits of dialogue and monologues that Philip Seymour Hoffman goes on where he's talking about his life and his struggles, and when you're listening to that, you're kind of like, wow, that kind of relates to life as a whole. Like there's a scene where he's with his company. It's not one of the not so subtle moments of the movie, but he's sitting with his acting troupe, and he's like, I want to do this play about how everyone you've ever met is going to die. You're going to die. The one thing we all have in common is that we're going to die, and yet here we all are ignoring it and living in the moment, and I want to explore this idea that everything beautiful has to end. And like that's sort of like the gist of the movie is watching him like kind of dealing with these own thoughts that he's trying to put into this play that he keeps on trying to make. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, where he's like, this play has to be realistic, and to the point where it eventually gets to be where the play is literally verbatim his own day-to-day life, hiring other actors to play versions of people he knows. He hires an actor to play a version of himself. It gets to the point where he's like, okay, well, if this is a play about my life, then my actor needs to be making a play, so we need to hire an actor to play the actor playing me in the play, and it just keeps on snowballing. But
I like that.
It's very, if you liked Eternal Sunshine,
it's almost like
very strange.
Citizen Kane shot where he's looking in the two mirrors on the opposite sides,
exactly.
and you just see like an infinite, like, okay, so I'm directing a play about a guy who needs to be directing a play about a guy who needs to be directing a play about a guy.
Basically, yeah. But like the whole movie, it's a very depressing movie, but not through it trying to depress you. It talks a lot about these thoughts and experiences that everyone
it sounds like
has.
It touches on a lot of things that make you human, thinking
exactly.
about your own mortality, and everything beautiful comes to an end, like you said.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that can make a movie really great if it identifies with a lot of people, and that's on that certain level.
Yeah, and it's not even just that too. There's so many other things like how you relate to other people and how you're sort of stuck in your own perspective, and you can never really know somebody, and like there's the whole movie, almost every single line of dialogue is a metaphor for something else, and it's not all just like, here's a bunch of pretentious garbage thrown out that I've been thinking that's not related to like everything, and
not tied together at all.
Exactly, everything is so neatly tied together to the point
Charlie Kaufman, man, how does he do it?
Exactly,
how does he do it?
He's a genius. He
must spend years on one screenplay.
He made that movie, and then I think he didn't make another movie again until 2015, and we'll talk about that at another time too, because both of those movies that are what I really want to recommend. But yeah, I've talked about Synecdoche, New York enough.
So that's your number one.
That's my number one.
You said you can't talk about your number two right now.
I will get to my number two.
So you have a very rigid list.
At least when we get to my top 5, it's pretty rigid. Like there are movies, like the top 10 is like a little loosey-goosey, but once you get into top 5, it's like, okay, these are movies I all love for various reasons, and they're kind of like firmly, it would take a lot for me to see something and knock it out of place.
The way I think about movies and favorite movies is, for me, it's a lot more organic. Like, the two movies that I mentioned, 2001 and Jurassic Park, will always hold a high place, as will a lot of other movies. Like, I could probably give you a rough top 10, but it would very much change from day to day. Right. Some days Jaws might be up there, some days it might not be up there, some days, like, I just watched Back to the Future again the other day, and now I'm like, wow, Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. And then I would go on a Zemeckis kick, go watch Flight, or go watch Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Right.
He's a great director.
He is, yeah.
And then But it's a much more organic change for me. I try not to restrict myself to a rigid list, but the fact, I mean, that's impressive to me that you did, because I can't do that.
Yeah.
Like I narrowed it down to those two movies just in terms of one by technical standards and one by technical standards and entertainment value.
Right.
I think they both have great entertainment value.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely recommend that movie to you at some point, because I've recommended it to a few people, and the general thought I usually get back is like, that was depressing, pretentious garbage. Why would you make me watch that? So I'm really interested to see what you would say about that.
About Synecdoche?
Yeah, we'll get to that at some point. If you want to watch it on your own, go for it.
I'm definitely going to look it up. You can look forward to my review of Synecdoche.
It's a little tricky to find, but it's worth it if you can.